We're going to pick up where we left off. Last class, we got through the first speech of Phaedrus from Plato's Symposium. Today, I don't know how much time we'll have. My last class, we were only able to get through the next three. We covered Pausanias, and we covered Eric Simicus, and we barely got started on the speech of Aristophanes. So we'll see how far we get today here in this class. Maybe we'll do a little bit better than them. We'll see. But that's on the agenda today. I guess one thing I need to mention is that we'll be finishing this next class. So let me actually share the screen here for a second. So for next class, right? Like I said, last time we covered Phaedrus. If you weren't here, you should have watched the replay if you weren't here. But if you didn't watch the replay, that's what we did last time. We got to the first speech. For next class, you need to read through Socrates, right? So for today, you should have had all the way through Agathon. If you haven't done that, you need to do that, and you need to read all of Socrates' speech. You don't need to read the part at the end. You can skip that last section with Alcibiades' entrance. You don't need to read that. If you want to, go ahead for curiosity's sake, but we're not going to be talking about it. We won't cover it in class or anything like that. So that's on the agenda for next time, okay? And for next week, I don't really know how far we'll get into it, but I'm thinking by the end of the week next week, we're going to probably barely get started on the next textbook. So if you don't have a copy of this yet, you need to get it, right? The René Descartes Meditations on First Philosophy. So we'll be wrapping up. I'm thinking next class we'll get pretty close to the end of the symposium. And then on Tuesday of next week, we'll wrap up whatever we have left and kind of finish up Plato. And then Thursday of next week, for sure Thursday, we'll get started on Descartes. Now, the topics for your first paper, I haven't posted yet. I'll probably post the topics for the apology here in the next day or so. And I'll post topics for the symposium sometime next week. Once I post all those topics, for the symposium and apology, then you'll have the essay will be due 1 week from then. So I think that would be something like the 29th, something like this. I don't know what the syllabus says. I'm looking at the chat box here. Did you get my email? I don't know. Maybe. If I did, I should have responded to it. If I didn't respond to it, I probably didn't get it. I thought I'd check my email today. I thought I'd cleared it out. Sometimes if you email me a question that you should already know the answer to, I don't respond. Like if you ask me a question about something that's on the syllabus that you should already know, I'll ignore it. Or if you just email me and say, I'm not going to be in class, I'm not going to respond to that. You know, I'm sorry. Like, thanks for telling me, but I know you weren't in class. Like, unless you have like a doctor's note and you want an excuse, then email me. Or if you're going to miss like several classes in a row for some reason, then email me. But I mean, if you're going to email me and just to say like, I'm going to be late or I'm not going to make it, like, I guess it's a courtesy. I know some professors like want you to do that. I just look at it and erase it. That's just what I do. Okay. Somebody says, when do you think the first essay will be officially due? Thank you, they said, because I think it's the 29th. If the syllabus says something different later, we can go by that. I think it might say the 30th, but it'll be not this week coming up, but the week after, right? It will probably be.
Oh, I had sent you an email on regards of a health situation that happened this past Friday with me.
Okay, yeah, I think I saw your email in my inbox. I haven't opened it yet. Yeah. But if it's something personal, you can just save that for office hours or before and after class. It's really not helpful to just bring it up in the middle of class. I'm kind of just asking like general questions that would apply to anybody taking this class. But if you have a personal thing or a personal issue, you know, then you can just talk with me after the class is over, or you can come visit me in office hours. or I'll look at the email later today and respond to it. But if you're sick and you can't make it, I'm sure we can work around it if that's your question. But yeah, that goes for everybody. If you have a personal issue or personal question that only applies to you, bring it up to me in office hours or email me, and I'll try to get back to you in as timely manner as I can. But I think that's all the announcements I have for today. Again, by the end of next week, we'll be done with the symposium, and we'll get started on the next textbook. The paper topics will be posted pretty soon, and the due date for the papers in a couple of weeks. So, oh, and also one last thing real quick before we dive in. If you have an idea for your own topic, you don't have to wait for me to post any. If you decided, I want to write about Plato's Apology, I've already got a good idea for an essay, I want to write about this, then I encourage that, sure. But just make sure you run it by me first. But I'll probably say yes. I just want to make sure it's an appropriate topic. So that's that. But before I dive in and kind of pick up where we left off, anybody else have any like just sort of general questions about the class or due dates or anything? Looks like everyone's pretty much satisfied. Okay, cool. So let's not spend too much time on this, but let's recap just a little bit. Let me share that screen again. So last time we covered the first speech. Remember, these are all speeches in praise of love, love being eros, the Greek word eros, erotic love. So we're not just talking about, love for your brother, your mother, love for pizza, love for sports. No, like the kind of love when I'm drawn towards somebody. They all give speeches, at least that's what they're supposed to give speeches about, and Phaedrus begins, okay? He gives us the first speech. And he's the rhetorician, so he teaches people how to speak well and use language really well. Who can tell me, kind of recap, what did he say about love? What was sort of the gist of his speech? He was praising love for what reason? I guess I can give you a hint. He said it was a sort of a guide. It gave us guidance. In what way? What did he say?
He was saying, love is like a moral compass, somewhat.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. It gives us a sort of moral compass. Okay, so what does that mean for those of you who what is a moral compass?
Like your general morals, like what you think is wrong from right.
Right. And he seems to think it does this in a good way, right? So it makes you act good, it makes you act well, it makes you do good things and feel ashamed to do bad things. So love inspires us in a very positive way. And we talked about this a little bit, I think, last time, and we kind of picked it apart, and maybe we didn't quite agree with him, right? Yeah, maybe sometimes love can do this, but sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on who we're in love with. Good. So let's see if this next speech by Pausanias is any better. Let's see if it's an improvement. Because remember, I think I mentioned this also last time, that all of these speeches here, right? Some people interpret the dialogue this way. You don't have to if you don't want to. I have my reservations about this. But many people, interpret this dialogue to be a very progressive dialogue, that each speech gets better. So Phaedrus was the first. His is the lamest. It's not good. It's further removed from a true account of love. But Pausanias is a little bit closer. Now, remember, Pausanias was Agathon's lover, and this might affect his speech somewhat. Let's see if it does. I don't know. Again, maybe that'll be helpful. Maybe it won't. But let's read a little bit of Pausanias, see what he has to say about love. So this is on page. Let me find this here. Page 13. So Pausanias, again, he comes right after Phaedrus. He says, Phaedrus, I'm not quite good. Go ahead. You have a question?
I got the book online, like on some Barnes and Nobles. So I was trying to see if like the numbers lined up.
It's look for line number 180. So if you have like the line numbers in the column. It's 180D. It's a few lines above that, but that's a good marker. 180D. So
Oh, what's the first line?
it says, Phaedrus, I'm not quite sure our subject has been well defined. Our charge has been simple, to speak in praise of love. This would have been fine if love himself were simple too. But as a matter of fact, there are two kinds of love. In view of this, it might be better to begin by making clear which kind of love we are to praise. Let me therefore try to put our discussion back on the right track and explain which kind of love ought to be praised. Then I shall give him the praise that he deserves as the God he is. So he starts by sort of saying, look, there are two kinds of love, right? And he's going to get into this in more detail a little bit later, right? If love were simple, it would be a simple matter, but we have to distinguish between types of love. And he gets into all this mythology. He talks about Aphrodite. In fact, let me share my screen here because I have this written out for you guys. He mentions that in Greek mythology, there was a heavenly Aphrodite and a common Aphrodite. And corresponding to this is a common versus a heavenly love. So I'll come back to that in a second, but, you know, I never heard of this other Aphrodite. In fact, you know, I mean, I'm a big fan of Greek mythology. I think it's pretty fascinating, but I never actually heard of this, that there were two Aphrodites until I had read this dialogue. So I was kind of confused the first time I read it. Now, most of you.
What page is that?
If you have the textbook, it's page 13.
Oh, okay.
Right at the beginning of Pausanias' speech. So, you know, if you're like me and you're a big mythology nerd, you've definitely heard of Aphrodite, but maybe you've even seen pictures of her without even knowing it. She's the one that's always pictured on a seashell emerging from the ocean. She's supposed to be this very beautiful goddess. She's so beautiful that no one can resist her charms. And some people have even interpreted her to be just the personification of desire, right? Whenever you have desire or yearning for somebody, that's Aphrodite. That's the force of Aphrodite. So that's the one I'm familiar with. But he mentions these two kinds of the two types, right? There's two Aphrodites, and Aphrodite is always associated with Eros, Cupid. Sometimes you'll see paintings of Aphrodite with Cupid, you know, next to her, like flying around with his little bow and arrow. So he says, so there's always like, go ahead.
I was gonna say, a cartoon I love watching is called Symposium, and there's an episode about Aphrodite, but instead of her looking beautiful, she looks awful, but she still spreads love through a curse. She used a bouquet of flowers, and she throws it out and make everyone around her, instead of being mean, they be peaceful.
Right. Well, I guess in both cases, though, then according to your account, that she'd be a calming force. A force that brings about certain qualities that we associate with love. It could either be passionate or it could be more calm and what's the word I'm looking for? Like you're good with your guests, like you're a good host or something like that. You're not accommodating. You're comforting in some way, right? Okay, I don't know. I'm not sure that's where
Hospitality.
What's that?
Hospitality.
There you go. Hospitable. Yeah, you got hospitality. There you go. I don't know that's where he's going with this though. I mean, that might be like what you say might be true. There might, and again, I'm not familiar with this other Aphrodite. They might be associated with that. I know Zeus is. Zeus is associated with hospitality, but that's not. It doesn't seem like that's where he's going. Okay, let's read what he says, and let's try to see where he's going with this. So, what's the difference? What does this have to do with love? He says it's a well-known fact that love and Aphrodite are inseparable. If therefore Aphrodite were a single goddess, there could also be a single love. But since there are actually two goddesses of that name, there are also two kinds of love. I don't expect you'll disagree with me about the two goddesses, will you? One is an older deity, the motherless daughter of Uranus, the god of heaven. She is known as Urania, or heavenly Aphrodite. There's actually a little bit of sexism here, right? Because the heavenly Aphrodite is motherless, so they think that's better because there's no woman involved, so it must be a better. So there, again, there's a lot of sexism in this dialogue. Some of it's really blatant, and some of it's kind of under the surface. But the other goddess is the younger, the daughter of Zeus and Dion. Her name is Pandemos, or common Aphrodite. It follows, therefore, that there's a common as well as a heavenly love, depending on which goddess is love's partner. And although, of course, all these gods must be praised, we must still make an effort to keep these two gods separate. Okay, so what's the difference, do you think? I mean, maybe you did the reading. I'm hoping most of you did do the reading, but I'm coming to realize, as a professor who's been doing this for over a decade, that that's asking too much of college students a lot of times to do readings. But even if you didn't do the reading, what do you think? What do you think he means by a heavenly love versus a common love? What are they going to look like? What's the difference?
He explains it as the heavenly love is like a love for males, like just a love for boys.
Well, okay, that's true. You're right about that. But I thought I said this last time. I want us to kind of ignore some of these things because, like, this is based on sexism. He's like, oh, the love of men is better when it's between two men. But he says that because he's sexist. Why does he believe it? Why would he say that the heavenly love is better? Why is love between men better? In his opinion, what is it about men that makes them better than women? I don't agree with him, but he's sexist. What does he say? Why are men better than women, according to him? Okay, if you're sexist against women, what is it likely that you're going to believe about them? Are you gonna, if you're sexist and you hate women, are you gonna, if you're, say you're a man and you're sexist and you hate women and you think they suck, are you gonna think they're smarter than men or dumber than men?
You think they're
You're gonna think they're dumber. Are you gonna think they're better or worse?
I'm also say this.
Okay, so I'm not saying I agree with him. I think he's a sexist pig in this regard. But if that's the case, if he were right, why would he say that that's a better love? What is it about the heavenly love that's better? If there were two men in love and they didn't care about each other's at all, except they like to have sex all the time, you think that's what he's talking about? Two gay guys having sex all the time? That's all they ever have? That's heavenly? Like, what's his point here? No, not at all. Not at all. What's that?
He's talking about an emotional connection, like a mental connection as well.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe it's okay, but I might be careful with the word emotional, but certainly intellectual. He seems to think it's not based on like physical desire. It's based on respect, like you said, for their intellect or their personality or something like that. It might be emotional. I don't think Socrates quite likes emotions, so that's why I'm sort of hesitant. But this is Pausanias, so we have to keep this in mind. He's not the perfect speech. We're sort of leading up to that.
His speech is like about homosexuality.
What about homosexuality?
I said his speech is pretty much about homosexuality.
Well, a lot of it is, but I thought I said last class that that's a lot of like historical stuff that it's very distracting. If you really want to talk about it, we can, but I think it's a waste of our time. He spends about 3 pages talking about the practices of Greek culture that are very unique to that time period that no one practices anymore. He talks about this practice of older men taking younger boys as their mentor. If you want to get into that, we can, but this is not a history class. It's not a class on the history of sexuality. I'm trying to get at the meat. Like, to be honest with you, I think that stuff makes his argument even weaker, because all he does is he compares their practice to the practice of other cultures and how it's superior. And to me, that stuff's kind of silly. If you want to focus on it, by all means, we can, but I just don't see that is very constructive. Honestly, I think the main point he's making, that I think is still a pretty relevant point, whether you're homosexual, heterosexual, or whatever. I think the relevant point is sort of what I think. What is it? Was it Ariana
I
Somebody
was
was
just saying
saying,
that's what it seems like he's talking about.
well, I think that's what he spends a lot of the time talking about, but I'm trying to ignore that stuff because I think it's kind of stupid and silly and like, I mean, it's, well, I don't want to say silly. It is interesting. It's kind of fascinating because it's like, it's such a unique dynamic historically, but I just think we're going to get bogged down in historical facts about things that aren't that relevant to the topic at hand. The topic at hand is love. And what he says about love that I think is kind of relevant is this idea that there's a difference of, you know, what you might call lust, you know, kind of a physical attraction, but then there's this other sort of love. He's calling it the heavenly, which is more of a intellectual, or you care about their personality, right? So I mean, yeah, he does mention homosexuality. If you want to dwell on that, we can. But I think it's just a waste of time, honestly. There's a whole book on it too in the footnotes. Let me find it. Page 16 at the bottom. If you really want to hear about it, there's a whole book called Greek Homosexuality from Dover Press. Go look it up and buy it on Amazon. Tells you everything you need to know, right? But I think that's just distracting, right? I think he is making, honestly, I think some of the things he says about that are just, he's talking about how some older men take advantage of younger men, right, in the society. And I honestly think this might be part of his bias. He's trying to he's trying to defend himself against probably some judgy people around there, because remember, he's Agathon's lover and he's way younger than Agathon. So, and this is my reading of it. I'm reading into it, I have to admit. I think he might be trying to defend himself. Like, people are looking at him like, you're just this young kid who's dating this older celebrity poet, Agathon, and, you know, you're just his groupie. And I think he's trying to say, no, it's deeper than that, right? We don't just have this vulgar love, this common Aphrodite love. We have this heavenly, you know, type of love. So I'm gonna read the passage where he explains what he means by the common versus the heavenly. But before I do, let's actually read right where I left off, because he says something here that we might want to pause and think about for a minute, because he makes a claim that it seems to make sense on the face of it, but when we think about it further, maybe not so much. He says at the bottom of page 13, at the bottom of page 13, he says, and this is right after he says, look, we've got to keep these two gods separate. We've got to keep the higher, the heavenly, and the common Aphrodite separate. And he says the reason for this applies in the same way to every type of action. Considered in itself, no action is either good or bad, honorable or shameful. Take, for example, our own case. We had a choice between drinking, singing, or having a conversation. Now, in itself, none of these is better than any other. How it comes out depends entirely on how it is performed. If it is done honorably and properly, it turns out to be honorable. If it is done improperly, it is disgraceful. And my point is that exactly this principle applies to being in love. Love is not in himself noble and worthy of praise. That depends on whether the sentiments he produces in us are themselves noble. You know, this kind of, I would say, in a way, kind of fixes the problems that we found in Phaedrus, in his account. Remember his account, like, oh, love's going to make you a good person. Well, maybe not. What if you're in love with somebody who's evil? Wouldn't that person make you do bad things? If you're in love with a good person, you might do. So this might be an improvement on the previous speech. However, we might want to pause here and ask this question. Is what he's saying true? It seems to make sense when it comes to love. He talks about dancing, chatting, right? Singing, dancing, having a conversation. He says, none of these things are bad in themselves. It depends on how you do them. If you do them shamefully, if you drink a whole lot and act all crazy, that's bad. But if you drink just a little and enjoy yourself and have a good time and have fun and you don't get too drunk, then that's good, right?
Like when they went to the party, when at the beginning of the book, he started explaining about how they went to the party, and some of them they asked if they wanted to continue, if they wanted to drink or not, but some of them said no because they was already getting over a hangover from the previous night of the party.
Right. So I guess some of those guys didn't heed this advice. They drank too much, right? And now they're trying to be virtuous by being, somewhere in the middle, I suppose, right? But
Isn't this also in the Bible? Doesn't it sort of kind of say something like that in the Bible?
really, where? Maybe it does. I mean, I've read that
I'll
book.
find it for you, but yeah, it says it
Yeah.
about drinking. I think it basically says like a little is okay, but if you drink too much and the actions that follow are not okay, or overstimulating yourself in any way is not okay.
Wow. Well, you better point that passage out to the Baptists because they don't seem to like,
Okay.
yeah. But yeah, I always wonder. It's like why do some Christians think it's not good to drink? Didn't Jesus turn water into wine? Seems like he was okay with it. But yeah. So, but my question is though, does this really apply? But you're talking about drinking, okay? And he's talking about that too. And he's also talking about loving, and he's talking about what dancing and singing. But he also says that this applies to every action, right? He says no action is either good or bad, honorable or shameful. It just depends on how it's done. Yeah, it says don't overindulge. I'm looking at the comments over here. Don't overindulge in anything, including liquor, wine, drugs, anything. Yeah, I mean this was a part of the Greek ethos, you could say. They had this notion of moderation. You had to find the middle. If you ever read any Aristotle, he seems to make this kind of the central pillar of his ethics. To be good is to not be too extreme. You don't want to be excessive. You don't want to be deficient. You got to find that happy middle ground, that golden mean, as it's sometimes referred to. But does this really apply to every action, any kind of action? So anything is just neutral. It just depends on how it's done. Like again, he's just talking about drinking, dancing, singing. What about anything else that you think that might not quite work?
I feel like there's a lot of things that wouldn't work, like hurting someone else, like
Right.
murder, like
Murder. There you go.
Yeah, like there's a long list.
Yeah, it seems like his principle doesn't really apply to murder, right? Well, murder's not wrong or right. It depends on how it's done. If you're a good murderer, it's good, and if you're a bad murderer, it's bad. That's like no, so yeah. This again, I don't think this principle applies as universally as he seems to think it does. All right, but where's he going with this, right? How do we properly love somebody, and how do we do it improperly? And so let's read this on. Again, this is on page 14, the second paragraph. He says, and so he's talking about the common Aphrodite. That's the more common love, and then there's the heavenly Aphrodite. That's, I guess, the higher love. So he starts with the common. Now, the common Aphrodite is himself truly common. As such, he strikes wherever he gets a chance. This, of course, is the love felt by the vulgar, who are attached to women no less than boys. More sexism there, and as you point out, homosexuality, right? The men are better than women, so loving men is better than loving women, right? But these guys don't care who they love whoever. And since all they care about is completing the sexual act, so it's all about sex. All they care about is getting laid, right? Whether they do it honorably or not is of no concern. That's why they do whatever comes their way, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So they're not selective. As many notches I can get on my belt as I can. I don't care the quality. It's all about quantity, right? And which one it is incidental to their purpose. For the love who moves them belongs to a much younger goddess who through her parentage partakes of the nature both of female and of male. This was something that was odd about Greek culture to us. To most societies, I would say, since these ancient times, the general stereotype, most of us, when we're kind of like thinking about stereotypes about men and women, usually the stereotype is that that men are the ones that can't control their sexual urges, right? That men are the ones, it's all about sex, that's all he wants, that's all he cares about. That's sort of the popular conception, is that men are the ones that all make a big deal about sex. That wasn't the case in ancient Athens, in ancient Greece. They actually thought women were the horny ones, that women were they're the ones that can't control themselves, and that men were more, you know, you know, austere and disciplined and steady and this sort of thing. So they sort of had a reverse view of this. There's a famous play by Aristophanes. He's one of the guys we'll talk about. He's a playwright, and he wrote a play called the Lysistrata. And in that play, all the women are angry with the men because they're at war, and they're fighting Sparta, and they've been at war for decades, and the women are just tired of it. They want the men to stop fighting, so they all go on strike, and they decide to not have sex with the men, to get the men all frustrated, and to go on strike so the men will do whatever they want. But even when Aristophanes wrote this play, he had to make it believable, because that wasn't really believable. Most guys are like, oh yeah, the women, they're the ones that are going to be desperate. Guys will be fine, So he had to actually make the play believable. In order to do that, what he did, he had the women, they dressed all scantily clad. They would stand in front of their husbands and bend over and try to do things they feed them food that they were aphrodisiacs. And so they did this stuff to make their men aroused, but it was very, they were emphasizing the fact that men can control their emotions and can control their desires, but women not so much. And so since this common Aphrodite was born of a man and a woman, she's got a little bit of that in her. And so that's why this love is it's more like what you might refer to as lust, this sort of physical desire. Okay, well, let's see what he has to say about the heavenly Aphrodite. Contrast this with the love of the heavenly Aphrodite. This goddess, whose descent is purely male, hence his love is for boys. Again, we can just ignore that. I mean, if you want to, you can focus on it. I think it just makes his speech even weaker than it already is. But he says, this is a considerably older god, right? It's not the younger Aphrodite, it's an older god, and therefore free from the lewdness of youth. That's why those who are inspired by her love are attracted to the male. They find pleasure in what is by nature stronger and more intelligent. Again, there's that sexism. Men are stronger, more intelligent, so that's why this love is typically between men, right? Again, more sexism, embarrassing. Some are not moved. Some, he says, are not moved. He says, even within this group, some are not moved purely by the heavenly love. This is where I think he's getting defensive. He's like, I'm not this, okay? He says, those who do not fall in love with little boys, but they prefer older ones whose cheeks are showing the first traces of a beard, that's a sign they've begun to form minds of their own. I'm convinced that a man who falls in love with a young man of this age is generally prepared to spend the rest of his life with him. So this is a more long-term commitment. And obviously, if he loves the young kids, she just likes their beauty. When they have a little beard, then it's okay, right? So I think this is him getting a little defensive. I'm Pausanias. I know I'm younger than Agathon, but I've got a little bit of scruffy beard, and he likes me. We're long term. I'm not just some fling, right? So again, I think this is sort of the basic argument, is that the common love is the more physical, the one that's focused on sex primarily, whereas the heavenly is, yes, Joy says the more mature love, right? You care about their well-being. You don't just care about having sex with them, like having fun with them. You actually care about them being a good person. You want them to succeed, and have a good time in life. And that's why I think he spends so much time on these digressions, because he's talking about, how these old men that are rich will take on these young men as mentors, and they'll take advantage of them. And he says that, this is not a pure heavenly love. If you really do love somebody, you're not just out for that sexual gratification, but you also want, you want to support them, and you want them to have a good future. You care about their life. um Anybody have anything else they want to say about that? There's one more thing that I want to mention that Pausanias says that I think is kind of interesting, but before I do, I want to make sure nobody has any questions or comments on Pausanias so far.
I'm
Okay,
just writing things down.
what's that?
I'm just writing everything you're saying down, like
You're
you
just
know.
trying to write everything down? Okay. Well, I'll pause for a second here. I want to read that. There's this one passage. I'm skipping a lot because, like I said, I think a lot of this stuff is interesting, but not really that useful for our discussion. So I want to get to page 16 where he says something about love that I gotta say, I think there's something to this. I think that what he says is somewhat true, not just in his culture, but even today in our culture. But I don't know if I'm too happy with it. I don't know if I like the fact that it's true. And I think it's more true probably in our popular conceptions of love and the way we see love in media, right? In movies, TV, and things that we consume. It might not actually be the kind of thing you actually see in real life, but you're probably like thinking, what the heck is he talking about? So I better read the passage here. But he says that we allow people who are in love, we forgive them for all sorts of crazy behavior that we wouldn't forgive for someone else, right? If they're in love and they're doing it out of love, we kind of like, oh, I okay, they get a pass.
So when he say a man were willing to do what lovers do for the ones they love, what does that mean?
It sounds like you're reading a line from the previous speech, which we've already moved on from. Where are you reading that from? What page is that on?
Oh, 16.
16? Well, why don't you let me read it and try to explain what it says, right?
Oh,
So, yeah, that's where we're at, okay? So, this is on page 16, line 182E. Actually, a couple lines above that, he says, and kind of what I just said, right? That we praise a lover for doing some pretty crazy stuff that we wouldn't allow other people to do. So I'll read the line you just read, and then I'll try to. Well, maybe I won't explain it. Maybe somebody else will explain it, hopefully. But if they won't, I'll help out. Okay. So he says, recall also that a lover is encouraged in every possible way. This means that what he does is not considered shameful. On the contrary, conquest is deemed noble and failure shameful. And as for attempts at conquest, our custom is to praise lovers for totally extraordinary acts. So extraordinary, in fact, that if they perform them for any other purpose whatever, they would reap the most profound contempt. Suppose, for example, that in order to secure money, excuse me, or a public post, or any other practical benefit from another person, a man were willing to do what lovers do for the ones they love. Imagine that in pressing his suit, he went to his knees in public view and begged in the most humiliating way, that he swore all sorts of vows, that he spent the night at the other man's doorstep, that he were anxious to provide services even a slave would have refused. Well, you can be sure that everyone, his enemies no less than his friends, would stand in the way. His enemies would jeer at his fawning servility, while his friends, ashamed on his behalf, would try everything to bring him back to his senses. But let a lover act in any of these ways, and everyone will immediately say what a charming man he is. No blame attaches to his behavior. Custom treats it as noble through and through. And what is more remarkable is that, at least according to popular wisdom, the gods will forgive a lover even for breaking his vows. A lover's vow, our people say, is no vow at all. The freedom given to the lover by both gods and men, according to our custom, is immense. So again, it seems like he's saying that we excuse all sorts of behavior if it's out of love. Stuff that we normally wouldn't, right? He gives the example of getting on your knees and begging, please give me the job. Please let me, anything else would be like, dude, that's pathetic. That's screwed up. But if you were doing it out of love, then it's romantic. So sweet. Let me see. Joy's got a bunch of stuff she wrote here in the chat box. So let me read what she says. But if anybody else has something to say, you can jump in here. But let me read her first. She says, she's talking about how people are greatly motivated by love. Others observe and know that they're acting out of that motivation. There's no societal shame for attempts at courting. It's actually praised if they end up with the lover they want. That last part, I think, is important. If they end up with the lover they want. And even that, I think, is not enough. Because I really do think, I think when we think this and we picture it in our head, we're like, yeah, it's so sweet. But I don't know if that's really the case. I think that's just the movies we watch. I think, like, in real life, this kind of behavior doesn't work. I don't think it'll work. I mean, sometimes it does, but I don't know. Does anybody else have something to say? Because I was gonna give an example, but I don't want to step on anyone's toes here. I mean,
is it kind of like a grand gesture, like kind of like an engagement gesture? So if the girl says yes, everyone's like, oh my gosh, but if she says no, it's really embarrassing.
Right. Like, there's like some YouTube video, I think, where this guy's like, I think it was staged though, it was like fake. But apparently this guy, he proposes to his wife in public in like a shopping mall, and everyone's like all like, oh my God, and they're like all excited, but then she says no and walks off, and he's like devastated or something like that. But everybody feels sorry for him though. They're like, oh, so but like you said, these grand gestures, I think they're only effective if the person is already kind of attracted to you to begin with, like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, ladies, help me out here, but have you ever had a guy write a poem for you? Did it work? There's this I never saw this movie, but it's called Hitch. I couldn't remember the name, but luckily last class somebody remembered it. It's got Will Smith in it. And I've never seen it, but there's a clip that I saw that someone had posted, I think, to YouTube. And the clip, I think the movie is about, like, he's supposed to play this pickup artist, like he's real smooth with the ladies, right? Will Smith. And there's a scene, the only scene I've ever seen in the movie, where he's picking up this, or he's talking to this woman in a bar. This real pretty girl sitting there, and I think she's like just wants to be left alone. She's like just having a drink after work, so she's like blowing off all the guys. But he's so smooth, that he's able to talk to her, and he gets her kind of interest piqued, and she seems even kind of interested. But then he kind of leaves, right? He like kind of leaves her hanging, and she's like, oh, okay, I guess whatever. The next scene, I guess it's like a day later or something like that. It cuts to the next scene, and she's at work. Well, what he was talking to her at the bar, I guess he found out what she did for a living, and he like put two and two together, he tracked her down. So the next scene, she's at work, sitting at her desk, and she gets a UPS delivery. And the delivery driver shows up with this box, and she's like, what the heck is this? I didn't order anything, and special delivery. She opens the box, and it's one of those little toy walkie-talkies you get at a toy store, little Fisher-Price walkie-talkie. And she opens the box, she picks it up, and it's Will Smith, his voice. He's like, hey, how's your newspaper column going? She's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm just checking in on you, seeing how you doing, seeing what you're up to this weekend, and maybe you want to go have some dinner. And she's like, I don't know. She's like playing hard to get, but you can tell she's still kind of interested. And her friends at the office, all her girlfriends are like, they're all excited, like, say yes, oh, this is so exciting. Ladies, is that how it would have gone down in real life?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Not at all.
Yes, I get a bunch of no's in the chat box, right? Yeah. Imagine you meet a guy at a bar, even if he looks like Will Smith, right? And he finds out what you do for a living, and the next day you're at work and you get a package, and he's like asking you out on a walkie-talkie that's like low frequency, so it's probably like he's like within the block around your office building. That's creepy, man. So I think a lot of this behavior that he's talking about, Pausanias is talking about, and that we're sort of imagining this, like these grand gestures, these romantic gestures, I think honestly, like they don't really, and that doesn't happen in real life, man. It's a movie thing. It's a movie. You got Will Smith. He's smooth. You already like him to begin with before the movie even started. The editing and it's all done. And I don't know. So in a way, I think what Pausanias says is not exactly true. I think it's, it only to a certain extent, right? These sort of, depending on who it is, it can come off super duper creepy. And it don't quite work this way, right? Well, I better move on, right? I think I've said enough about Pausanias. Let's move on to Eric Simicus, because we'll probably never get through this if I let myself go here. Who was Eric Simicus, though? Remember, all these different characters, they all do something different, right? One's a rhetorician. Well, you already heard from him. Phaedrus teaches rhetoric. Excuse me. Pausanias, who we just finished, he's just a fanboy, I guess, for lack of a better word. He's Agathon's boyfriend. What about Eric Simicus, this next guy? What's his?
He's a physician.
He's a doctor.
Right, physician, doctor. He works with medicine. So he couches his speech in medical terms. I think his speech is the most confusing, to be honest with you. I think because he uses so much metaphor, it's not quite clear how all of these parallels that he's drawing between medicine and music and farming and love, it's not super clear what he's trying to say here. But hopefully I can help us maybe try to make some sense of it, or maybe some of you have a better idea than I do. I've got at least, there's a couple ways I think you can interpret this passage, but it's not really clear which of the two is better. So maybe you guys can help me along the way here. Let's read and see what he has to say. This is on page 20, where his speech begins. He says, he kind of refers back to Pausanias. He says, Pausanias introduced a crucial consideration in his speech, though in my opinion, he did not develop it sufficiently. So he's gonna use this distinction in Pausanias, this distinction between the common and the heavenly. He likes that, but he doesn't think it's been sufficiently worked out or developed, as he puts it. So we need to further extrapolate on this distinction. So let's see, where does he go with this? Let me therefore try to carry his argument to its logical conclusion. His distinction between the two species of love seems to me very useful indeed. But I've learned a single lesson from my own field, the science of medicine. It is the attraction we feel. Oh, sorry. Let me start that sentence over. I've learned a single lesson from my own field, the science of medicine. It is that love does not occur only in the human soul. It is not simply the attraction we feel toward human beauty. It is a significantly broader phenomenon. Okay, so not only is he's going to develop more fully this distinction between a common and a heavenly love, but he's going to broaden the scope of what we mean by love. Okay, so far we've only been talking about love occurring in the human soul, but he's going to say it's a much broader phenomenon. It certainly occurs within the animal kingdom and even in the world of plants. In fact, it occurs everywhere in the universe. Love is a deity of the greatest importance. He directs everything that occurs, not only in the human domain, but also in that of the gods. This is another thing that seems to be a theme of his speech, is the idea that love is it's a guide, just like Phaedrus said, but that it also directs and sort of balances out all that there is in the universe. It's a sort of balancing or a harmonizing force in the universe. But particularly, it balances opposing forces. Okay, he hasn't said that yet, but that's where he's going with this. And that's where I want to say it gets very confusing. And it's not quite clear how this applies to what we call love. Okay, so let's see how he explains this. He says, let me begin with some remarks concerning medicine. I hope you will forgive me giving pride of place to my own profession. The point is that our very bodies manifest the two species of love. Consider for a moment the marked difference, the radical dissimilarity between healthy and diseased constitutions. Constitution being the way what you're made of, right? Your body, right? And the fact that dissimilar subjects desire and love objects that are themselves dissimilar. Therefore, the love manifested in health is fundamentally distinct from the love that is manifested in disease. And now recall that, as Pausanias claimed, it is as honorable to yield to a good man as it is shameful to consort with the debauched. Well, my point is that the case of the human body is strictly parallel. Everything sound and healthy in the body must be encouraged and gratified. That is precisely the object of medicine. Conversely, whatever is unhealthy and unsound must be frustrated and rebuffed. That's what it is to be an expert in medicine. Okay, so to go back to the slide just very shortly here, remember we have this distinction in Pausanias between a common and a heavenly love. Eric Simicus seems to be switching it up a bit and changing the terms, right? And now he's thinking in terms of medicine, so he's going to talk about a healthy versus an unhealthy, or a healthy versus a diseased love. And he'll elaborate on this a little in the next paragraph, so I'll read that in a minute, but I just want to pause here for a second to kind of get your take on this so far, and if you might have any ideas, if anybody might have any ideas where he's going with this. You know, I mean, there's a lot of ways you could take this, but he seems to be saying that love, healthy love, involves what? It says you have to encourage what's encourage what's good and discourage what's bad. So how does that apply to what we've said so far about love, or maybe just about love in general, or does it? Do we have any ideas?
It kind of seems like he's saying that the same thing, like love is still your morals. This was good and wrong.
So it's similar to what Phaedra said about love being a moral compass, but I think now that he's got the this distinction between a healthy and an unhealthy love, he can kind of improve, I think, a little bit on Phaedrus, because he can say, well, if you have an unhealthy love, then you might not have a good moral compass, and you have a healthy love, you will have a good moral compass, right? So a healthy love will make you act good, but an unhealthy, not so much. Um, but he elaborates, and this is where I think I'm like, I'm not so sure if that's really right. Maybe that is. I like that. That's helpful. But he's going to throw all these extra considerations in that, it adds more confusion, I think, to the reading. But he says that he starts talking about medicine. What does medicine do? What is the goal of medicine? And this is on page 21. He says, in short, medicine is simply the science of the effects of love on repletion and depletion of the body. And the hallmark of the accomplished physician is his ability to distinguish the love that is noble from the love that is ugly and disgraceful. A good practitioner knows how to affect the body and how to transform its desires. He can implant the proper species of love when it is absent and eliminate the other sort whenever it occurs. The physician's task is to effect a reconciliation and establish mutual love between the most basic bodily elements. Which are those elements? They are, of course, those that are most opposed to one another, as hot is to cold, bitter to sweet, wet to dry, cases like those. In fact, our ancestor Asclepius, this is like the god of medicine, healing, he first established medicine as a profession when he learned how to produce concord and love between such opposites. That is what those poet fellows say, and this time I concur with them. So he's explaining this practice of medicine, and this may be pretty confusing to some people that they're not familiar with how medicine was practiced back then. But the way that they approached it was they thought that, hey, your body is made up of hot parts and cold parts. It's made up of dry parts and wet parts, and all these, you basically have all these opposites in you. And a healthy body is one in which those elements are balanced. You're not too hot, you're not too cold, you're not too dry, you're not too wet. So if a physician is able to do things to you, give you certain, medicines that will affect your body in the right way and bring it back to that equilibrium, right, where those elements are balanced. In a way, you might say that this relates to that principle of moderation we talked about earlier, how the Greeks thought, how Pausanias was saying that nothing is really bad in itself. It's, you just don't want to do it shamefully. You don't want to be too much or too little. You got to find this balance. There's a similar way of, somebody says homeostasis. Yeah. Similar concept. Yeah, you might say that's sort of like the modern day equivalent to this notion, right? You want to achieve homeostasis. Now, here's the part I have a problem with. How does this apply to love? How is love a balancing of opposites? I have a couple ideas, but I don't want to shout them out. I want to give y'all a chance to talk. You have any ideas? Anybody have any, how is love, like eros, how is that a balancing of opposites? Just like medicine apparently is a balancing of opposites. Nobody has any thoughts on that?
I guess it could be seen like basically it's a compromise, because in order, love is still a partnership of some kind.
Good, yeah.
So you still gotta be able to, in order for it to make it work, you have to be able to deal or work around or sometimes fix each other.
Right.
Good one.
Yeah, that's somebody in my last class said something similar to that, and I really like it, and I never really thought of it that way. I like that. I guess what you're saying is that hold on, let me gather my thoughts here before I just blurt them all out. Um, so it's sort of like if you're in a relationship with somebody, you're definitely not going to see eye to eye on everything, right? And so there's always going to be moments when you're going to have this antagonism. So love is sort of like working out those antagonisms, like it's finding a sort of a balance between the two. And I kind of like that, right? You could also, I think, to maybe even throw in a little Phaedrus, you could say that part of that ties into that moral guidance. So it's sort of like you could say maybe I'm in a relationship with somebody and they're not acting good, and I kind of nag them for it. I'm like, hey man, you need to behave yourself. And so I guide them, and they do the same for me when I'm being naughty. They sort of bring me back to the center, you know. That's, I guess, similar to what you were saying, a little bit different. Good. I like that. What else though? I mean, that's not the interpretation I thought of that first popped into my mind when I was reading this notion of the reconciliation of opposites. But I think that's probably a better answer than what I thought, honestly. But anybody had any other ideas? I'm wondering when we had the same thoughts that I had. Somebody asked if I assigned homework. No, I haven't, except for reading. Read all you can of this. We're going to try to get through it. So finish reading the Symposium. But back to my question. What else do you think he might mean by love being a homeostasis, right, or a reconciliation of these opposing elements?
Is it maybe that because love is technically an extreme emotion, like hate is, so maybe it's like tempering or regulating, like controlling that emotion, maybe.
Okay. To me, I don't know. It's possible. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's more like give and take. So what you give is what you take. So what you can give, like it's even. Like you don't go over that, or else it's not gonna be good for the other person or something like that.
Well, in a way, that seems to be kind of just like what's already been said. Like, so it's a compromise. You try to. And maybe this is not much different, honestly, but I was thinking what he meant was that, like, this idea that opposites attract, that, you know, if you're a person that is very passionate and maybe like really outgoing, that if you dated somebody or your lover was like that as well, that maybe that's too hot of a relationship. So you know, if you're hot-headed and you've got like a short temper and you're very passionate, and maybe you need somebody who can complement you, right? So two lovers will complement each other, right? Maybe if you're an introvert, you need to date an extrovert, and sort of where you lack, they sort of help fill in, and you can kind of, I guess that's a little different than what y'all were saying. Y'all were kind of talking about how love is a compromise and you have to sort of come to an agreement, and that's sort of what they might be talking about. What I'm saying is that maybe it's just that you fit together like a glove, right? And maybe, of course, there'll be compromise, but through that compromise, it's complementary. That you actually come to an agreement in some harmonious relationship to each other that you wouldn't find in someone else who is exactly like you. So if they were exactly like you, you actually might butt heads. Whereas somebody who's your opposite, but kind of fits with you, I don't know. Maybe that's what he's saying. Just a guess. He's not very clear, so we can kind of, we can kind of go any way we want with this. It seems like. Let's see how he elaborates on this. He gets to music. He starts talking about music, and he says that love is involved in music as well. So medicine is guided by love. When he's doing medicine, he's trying to reconcile opposites in our body, just like love itself is a reconciliation of opposites. Again, take that as you will. But he even says in music, when people are composing music, the musician is guided by love. So I'm going to skip over a lot of this, but I'll read some of like the main points he makes. This is on page 21, right where I left off. He says, medicine, therefore, is guided everywhere by the God of love, and so are physical education and farming as well. He'll get to that in a minute. He'll be talking about farming, agriculture is guided by this force of nature, right? Eros. Further, on a moment's reflection, it suffices to show us that the case of poetry and music, too, is perfectly the same. Indeed, this may have just been what Heraclitus had in mind, though his mode of expression certainly leaves much to be desired. Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic philosopher, so he came before Socrates. He's very interesting, one of my favorites, but he's very mysterious, and much of what he wrote was pretty hard to follow, and at least on the face of it, very contradictory. He said things like, you never can step in the same river twice, I guess because it's always changing and flowing, so it's never really the same river. But he quotes Heraclitus here, and he agrees with Heraclitus in his quote. He says that, according to Heraclitus, the one, and whenever you hear an ancient Greek philosopher talk about the one, they're typically talking about all that is, right? The one, the universe, right? The one, all that is, right? What does Heraclitus say about the one? He says the one, being at variance with itself, is in agreement with itself, like the attunement of a bow or a lyre. A lyre was a stringed instrument, okay? A bow, just like a bow and arrow, okay? So Heraclitus says the one, all that is, being at variance with itself. Now, Heraclitus thought that the universe had an inherent tension in it, an inherent strife. Not only is it always moving and flowing and changing, just like the river, but for Heraclitus, all that is held together by this tension, the tension of opposites, of opposition. And so Eric Simicus is saying he agrees with this. If anyone here is familiar at all with Taoism, the Chinese philosophy, ancient Chinese philosophy, maybe you know the yin-yang symbol, the black and the white, the light and the dark, good, evil. Similar notion in Heraclitus. The idea is that all these elements in the universe are necessary. They kind of balance each other out, right? Justice could not exist without injustice. Light could not exist without dark. Good can't exist without evil. Male without female, right? That these opposites, they're opposite, and there's this inherent tension between them, but there's a balance. They actually, they balance each other out, and they complement one another. And so he seems to be saying this about music. This applies to love, and that's what love is. Love is a reconciliation of these two opposing forces. How does this apply to music? He says, naturally, it is patently absurd to claim that attunement or a harmony is in itself discordant, or that its elements are still in discord with one another. Heraclitus probably meant that an expert musician creates a harmony by resolving the prior discord between high and low notes. So there's some musical terminology in here that some of you might not be familiar with, right? Does anybody maybe know what is a harmony? If you have two notes in music, two musical notes that are harmonious, that are in harmony, what does that mean, basically? Does anybody?
It's like they strengthen each other.
They go together. They go together, right? They work, right? Somebody mentioned the fifth harmony. You're talking about like a fifth as a musical interval. Right, or the fifth chord in a chord progression, right? The 5 chord is always the chord you resolve on or something. Well, anyway, so a harmony would be something that, again, the notes sound good together. They go together. What's discord? Discordance. If two notes are discordant, what does that mean?
Out of tune.
Yeah, well, not necessarily out of tune, but they don't go together. Like
they're opposite of each other, or
right,
like
right, yeah. So harmonious, they sound good together. Discordant, they don't. They sound kind of off. Why would you use discordant notes, or sorry, discordant chords or whatever? Why would you use discordance in your music? Composers do this. They put discordance, especially, you know, modern music especially. What is the point of all that? Why would
I
you
mean,
want to go ahead?
couldn't it like sometimes? I mean, like a lot of times, music. Well, no, every time music is used to tell a story, so you can put it in to show the like an aspect of conflict happening at the
Good.
moment.
Good. So like maybe like if the music is like a soundtrack to a movie or something, and there's like a real tense scene, you want to express that tension with a discordant note or discordant chord, right? Yeah, good. Um, what is he talking about here, though? 'Cause that's certainly one use for sure of discordance, but that doesn't seem to be what he was referring to here. He says something like, let me read it again. Um, he says, Heraclitus probably meant that an expert musician creates harmony by resolving the prior discord between high and low notes. So, in that context, what does discord do? Why might you use discord? It's followed by harmony. So you have a section of music where it's all discordant, and then it's resolved in harmonious, a harmonious section. Kind of a similar answer you just gave, but what would the point of that be? You think if you're a musician writing that, what would you be thinking about? Why would you do that?
Hmm.
Well, if like you said,
Could you repeat
discordant.
that one more time?
What's that?
I was saying if you could repeat that one more time.
Well, I was just asking, why would a musician use discordance and then follow it up by harmony? What would the
Oh,
effect? What would the effect of that be?
I guess I mean it would show you what happens when you get things right.
Good guess, but that's I think what he's saying, and this is what when I was taught music theory, was that usually it's used to create tension that gets resolved, and that resolution is very satisfying when it's preceded by tension. So if you just play a note that's harmonious, it's pleasing, sounds good. But if you play that note after a long section of discordance, you're all uneasy and you're all tense, and then all of a sudden there's this resolution. It's much more satisfying. It's like, you know, it's almost like, I don't know, if you feel pain and then you get a little bit of relief to that. Like let's say that, you know, you have this wound or something like that, like someone cut you and it hurts really bad, right? And they put some ointment on that to make you feel better, right? Now that's going to feel really, really good, of course. It's going to feel a lot better than if they just put that ointment on you when you didn't have the wound, right? Like the ointment might feel good. Oh, wow, that's really soft and it makes my skin feel you know, it's not all tight and dry like it was before. That's a really nice skin cream. I like that, right? So it's going to feel good, but it wouldn't feel as good as if like you had a sore, you had like this really dry skin that was harming you and hurtful, and then you put that cream on, and you're like, oh man, that feels so much better. What relief. So I think that's the point. You use discordance so that the really good and balanced and the harmonious moments are even that much more impressive. They're that much more harmonious. And so again, I'm not really sure how that works in a relationship between, I mean, I'm trying to, like, I'm thinking of, like, this is kind of a totally a vulgar example, so forgive me, but I'm, like, thinking of, like, makeup sex. Like, you're, like, you get, like, a big argument, like a heated argument with the person you're in love with, right? Like, I'm just thinking, like, you know, you get in a fight with your girlfriend, and, like, you're all angry, and then you make up and have, like, this really passionate sex or something. Like, I don't know
I
where
was,
my mind
it,
was going with that, but yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it kind of reminds me of what Alexander Pope, I think it's Alexander, yeah, Alexander Pope said in his Essay of Man, when he was basically kind of he was even though he claims to be like a devout Christian, he seems so his definition of Christianity seemed to go against that in the sense that he didn't view humanity's sins as a negative. He viewed it as something that we overcome, and then once we overcome it, we
Right.
become greater. We become greater.
Huh.
So it's like, and he said like the end goal isn't so much being like God. The end goal is happiness, and you gain that happiness when you overcome your weaknesses. So it's like you start off quote unquote bad, and you end up quote unquote good, in a sense.
So you have to go through some muck. You got to go through some tension to. It's almost like that sounds a lot like I'm wondering. I've never read Pope's essay. I'm wondering when did he write that? Because that sounds like something that either had a lot of influence on William Blake, or William Blake had a lot of influence on him. So I'm not sure who wrote first, right? Also, I'm sure Carl Jung probably was influenced quite a bit by that notion. But yeah, maybe that's the part of it, is that so love it takes you on this sort of roller coaster ride maybe, and so there's moments of discordance. There's moments when like you're in anguish because of the love, and it might be something horrible, something that is devastating, but it's through that struggle and through those sins, to use that word you used, that you are able to like rise above and become something even greater or something like this. Yeah, well, I like that. Interesting comments. I'm gonna skip over the rest of his speech, but I'm just gonna kind of quickly summarize it because I want to talk a little bit about Aristophanes, and we're almost out of time right now. I just noticed it's like 2:20, so we really need to wrap things up. But yeah, he gets into how does love. He already mentioned that love guides us in medicine, in music making. Then he says in farming and agriculture, and he thinks the seasons are akin to love, right? He says at the bottom of 22, in music as well as medicine and all other affairs, and divine as well as human affairs, we must attend with the greatest possible care to these two species of love. Even the seasons of the year exhibit their influence. So all the four seasons exhibit the influence of these different species of love. When the elements to which I referred to earlier, hot and cold, wet and dry, when they are animated by the proper species of love, they are in harmony with one another. Their mixture is temperate. So this is springtime, I guess, right? And so are the climates. Harvests are plentiful. Men and all living things are in good health. No harm can come to them. But when the sort of love that is crude and impulsive controls the seasons, he brings death and destruction. I guess this is summer and winter, right? So love can be seen in the movement of the seasons. One last thing before we move on to Aristophanes. Love inspires us in our relations with the world around us, with the seasons, with our planting, our cycles, with music. What else does he mention? It's on page 23. What else is love a part of? He says the rites of sacrifice are guided by love. What are the rites of sacrifice? What's he talking about there? I'll type that in the comment. Rites of sacrifice. And the word rites, it's not spelled like you think. Why can't I do this? It won't let me push enter. I keep pushing enter and it won't. It's RITES. Sorry, for some reason it will not let me put this in the chat box. I don't know what the deal is. Oh, I had to scroll down all the way to see the most recent comment. That was it. Now it's in there, right? Rights. No, that didn't work either. I don't know. Sorry, guys. I can't use the chat box. It's broken for some reason. I see all your comments, but I can't put my own. Anyways, oh, I see what it is. I'm trying to message somebody, who left the meeting. How can I go back to just the regular chat box? Oh, geez. Everyone. Okay, here we go. There we go. That's better. Rites of sacrifice. Now it's there. What are those? What are rites of sacrifice? What's a rite? R-I-T-E. Guys, don't be scared to look this
Like
stuff up. Yeah, go ahead.
Challenge, like a challenge, like a
It
trial
can
of
be.
some
It can
kind.
be. I understand why you would think that, because it's kind of used in a way that, can, like, someone will say, like, the rites of passage is the way that it's used. Like rites of, like, when you get a certain age, if you're a man, you have to do. That's a rite of passage that you have to do this. To be a true man. Many cultures have
Practice.
that. What's that?
Practice.
Good. It's a practice. It's a ritual. It's something that's done. So he's saying that basically, our relations with the gods, the Greeks would sacrifice to the gods. These are guided by love. It's the balancing of opposite elements. We're mortal. The gods are immortal, and we send them our reverence through our worship, right? Through, I guess, if you're a Christian, through prayer and devotion. But if you're a Greek, living in ancient Greece, you do it through sacrifice, right? Through rites of sacrifice. So Simicus thinks that love is present there as well, right? It's present in all these things, in religion, in medicine. It guides us in music and all this stuff, right? It's this universal primal force. Okay, well, we're completely out of time now, but I'm gonna just to test you. Let's see which one of you smarty pantses did the reading. Can somebody just very briefly, in a couple minutes that we have left, can you kind of summarize Aristophanes? He's the next guy we're going to. What's his speech all about? His is the one that he has a myth. He says that there's like a story way back when that explains why we love people. What's this myth? Let's see who did the reading. Did nobody do the reading?
He says that there's like 3 beings and like one is androgynous, but
Right.
the one that's androgynous is like a creature that's like part man and part woman.
Good.
And then I think it was Zeus got mad and like separated them, and so we're constantly like trying to find our other half, and
Good.
that's why there's like some people that are gay or lesbian and straight, and like it's not necessarily like a social thing. It's because like their other half is
Right.
that gender or something.
Right. Yeah, no way. I never thought of it that way. Maybe he's being really progressive here. He's like, hey, they can't help it. You shouldn't judge them, right? But yeah, you're right. So you got the gist of it. We're going to talk about this. And I have to say, this is probably my least favorite. It's probably the most fun and entertaining because of that fun story. But like you said, he tells us of the time when we were all once unified with our other half. We were either double man, double woman, or one man and one woman together, right? And then Zeus, because we were threatening the gods, he cut us in half, and now we're separate, right? So love is this yearning, right, where we feel this emptiness, and love is this yearning for wholeness, for completeness, for our other half. I sometimes call this the soulmate theory of love, that we have a soulmate, that we're not complete until we find that other half of our soul. So again, yeah, you want to say one last comment? I'll let Michael say something, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Yeah, you had something.
Technically, so one, I was gonna say it's kind of funny how he's not seen as being impious since he said that Zeus felt threatened by humans. But
Right.
second, I was thinking like technically, based off at least the Christian like mythos, like females, like God created the female human out of a male. So technically we are one. If you want to believe that, we are
Right.
technically one.
Maybe you could. I guess maybe you could interpret Genesis that way. But what you'd have to say, so like for every man is like a descendant of Adam, and every woman is a descendant of Eve, and so therefore like we all have our Adam if we're a woman, and we all have our Eve if we're a man or something. Like I don't know. I
mean that's what
there might be. I'm sure there are. If I've seen them, I don't remember, but I'm sure there are interpretations of Genesis just like that. I know that that a part of some of the sacrament, that marriage in Christianity is seen as a holy sacrament. A lot of that is based on Adam and Eve, right? That they were one, man and woman, and so that forms a unit, and it's a sacred unit, and that sort of thing. But yeah, so he seems to expand it to, like you were someone else was saying earlier, men and women, was it lesbians and gays. And basically it's just, you've got a soulmate. You're not complete, and you won't be complete till you find this person. And I find this interesting. Maybe it is impious, but I don't know. There were some pretty wacky stories about the gods. I think he was just saying, humans were, he does admit humans were, we got full of ourselves, we got overconfident, and we tried to invade Mount Olympus. And Zeus was going to kill us, but he wanted to keep us around so that we would still worship him. So he just cut us in half to confuse us, right?
That sounds like the Greek Tower of Babel.
Kind of is. That's a good analogy. It is kind of like we were getting too high and mighty, so God had to sort of, put us in our place and confuse us and scatter us. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but it is an interesting parallel. All right, well, I'm rambling on. Now it's officially 2:30, so it's officially time to go. So if you want to stick around, I'll stay for another 30 or 40 seconds in case. But if you want to leave, you're free to go. Just like I said, finish reading Symposium. Except for the last part, you can skip that last part with Alcibiades. We're going to get through as much of it as we can next class, hopefully finish it. But again, you're free to go. Your class dismissed if you want. But if you want to stick around and ask me anything, I'm all ears. But otherwise, have a good couple days, and I'll see you Thursday. Someone was asking about paper topics. Yes, I'll post them pretty soon. Probably the next day or so, I'll post topics for the apology, and sometime early next week, I'll post topics for the symposium. And the paper will be due week after next. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I guess I'm going to close the meeting. Did you have something, Michael? Or? No? Okay. All right. Y'all have a good day. See you next time. Cheers.